Hey, y'all, thanks again for tuning in. I have a very good friend from all the way across on the other side of the world, Nicolai Morris, with me today. She is currently the Strength and Conditioning Specialist at High Performance Sport New Zealand. And Nicolai, I guess we met almost 2 years ago. Year and a half.
Yeah, I think it was about that.
Yeah, I think it was about that. But why don't you tell all the wonderful people that are tuning in about kind of who you are, what you're doing currently, and what you're about.
So I'm an Australian working over in New Zealand. So I'm working with the New Zealand rowing team at the moment, and the lead of the under-23s New Zealand rowing team. I'm originally from Australia, as I said, and have moved from Sydney to New Zealand about 6 months ago. So yeah, just learning all the ways of New Zealand and kicking around with all the rowers, which is good fun.
Nice, that's awesome. So previously you were at the University of Sydney, which over there you just call it a uni as opposed to college or university like we do in the States. So tell us a little bit about what you were doing there compared to what you're doing now, and maybe some of the differences or similarities.
Yep. So at Sydney Uni, I was working with 6 sports I was the lead of. So swimming, athletics, soccer, rugby 15s and 7s, and water polo. So that was a really awesome job to hone my craft and be able to work with a whole range of athletes. Unlike in some countries like the US, where if you're doing a college sport, you're at college, we didn't have – so if you were part of say the water polo team, you didn't actually have to go to university at all, let alone be a university student at the specific uni. So we got people aged from – I think my youngest athlete was 17 or so, all the way into their mid-30s. So we had a really big range of athletes. However, predominantly was around that early to mid-20 age. And we did get a lot of people who were at university at Sydney Uni. So, excuse me, the big differences between what I was doing there and what I'm doing now, it's a bit of a step up. So working in the college or uni sector, going now into the elite sector. So I'm working only with the elite and the under-23 New Zealand team in rowing. So yeah, just servicing one sport's a massive, massive difference compared to 6. You can really deep dive into what's needed and really make sure that the athletes get your absolute full focus, and everything you do is catered around making sure that they have the best chance to achieve their goals as possible.
That's awesome. So obviously you're talking about differences between, the US and Australia or New Zealand, and there are quite a lot of differences when it comes to, university sport. But there's also a bit of a difference between certification as well. And typically over there, what I've learned, and maybe you could, dive into it a little more, is
Yep.
that there's a difference between being certified at the uni level as opposed to the elite level, or vice versa, where if you were to do youth versus, the uni level, where in the United States, you can get that one certification and it really applies to that entire age range and every different level of athlete.
So in Australia, New Zealand's a little bit different, but in Australia, to be a strength and conditioning coach, you have to be an accredited Australian Strength and Conditioning Association member or qualified member. So there's 3 levels. Level 1 is more community level and youth level. And then we move to level 2, which there's probably, I think it's about a 30% of who do level 1 move to level 2. It's not that many. It's a lot harder. It's almost like a thesis plus practical load. And then to be a level 2 strength and conditioning coach is needed to work in most professional organizations or Olympic sports. In Australia, you pretty much need that. And level 3 is an extra that a lot of the higher elites have. And then there's a subcategory to that, which is called the Professional Coaches Association. And basically there's 4 levels of that, which is associate, which is anyone. Then you move to professional, which is, I think, 4 years equivalent of full-time work with high school to pro sport. And then 6 years in professional or equivalent is elite. And then 10 years with Olympic level or professional sport is the master category. And we don't have that many of the master category at this stage. That's a building one. Most, I would say probably around 85% of strength and conditioning coaches in Australia have an undergraduate in sports science, and then a large majority now have gone and done their masters as well. So it's quite highly educated, and New Zealand is different in the way of they don't, at this stage, because it's such a small population, they don't, you don't need to have a professional certification, but you do need to have pretty much all the hirings in elite sport are only if you've done at least a master's degree. So it's more on the education side, less on the certifications.
Okay, nice. And you touched on it a little bit, how most of you have a sports science, at least undergrad.
Yep.
I think can you prove right or prove wrong about, I guess I could classify it as maybe as a misconception that most Australians are always your sports scientists. There's a lot of US coaches that they see an Australian and it's like, oh my gosh, accent, they must be a sports scientist. But I mean, I've personally been over there and it's the same. So, I mean, can you bring your perspective on that?
I think maybe why that is because when the US finally started bringing in, and it was allowing sports science, because at the start, I would say the US was a little bit behind everywhere else due to the requirements and the athletes not wanting their IP given and anything around that side. So whereas Australia is a little bit different on the pro sport, and you're kind of, if you're at the club dictates what you do. Rather than the other way around. So we've done GPS for a very long time. However, that's why a lot of Australians were then hired over in the US, because they knew the technology. So that's probably why that misconception's around. Most of us have done at least some form of sports science as a necessity. So in the lower level jobs or club level jobs before going into high level and professional, you often will have to do the sports science role as well as the strength and conditioning role, even if it's not your favorite thing. So we tend to, so with Sydney Uni, for example, when I was working in the men's rugby club, we had to do all the load monitoring, all the GPS, anything around sports science that we could, because no one else was there to do it for us. We're understaffed, basically.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I might know the answer to this question, but for those that don't know you, can you talk about your passion, whether it is applicable professionally or personally?
I have a couple of passions. I love coaching. I love working with people. I find so much joy in trying to make someone's day by showing them a way they can improve or make them have a bit of fun in the gym. I think it's the coolest job ever. I also have another passion. I love swimming myself. I think there's something incredible there's something incredibly meditative about being in the water. I'm very much a type overthinker, and sometimes that can be a curse in the water, but other times it just allows you to quiet down the world and just be at one with yourself, I guess.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's super cool. And I actually, yes, the swimming was the one that I felt very much.
I figured that.
But I mean, you're always posting, and I know it's something that you try to do as often as possible. But it was kind of cool. I had recently been on a podcast here in the States, and it was a younger coach that interviewed me, and he was a college swimmer, and he said there's just something meditative about staring at that black line, you know, and
well, it depends. If you're a backstroker like myself and I was lucky enough to spend most of my swimming career swimming in outdoor pools, you get to stare at the clouds, which is a little bit more interesting than the black line I found.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's very cool. But regardless, there is a meditative factor that that he talked about, and you kind of like have alluded to. So that's very cool. Have you ever done open water swims?
Yeah. So where I grew up was probably around an hour to an hour and a half away from the beach. So I didn't grow up doing open water at all. But when I moved to Sydney, I was like, okay, there's a new challenge. I've got an irrational fear, like sadly a lot of swimmers, of sharks, just terrifying. But I was like, and I'm not used to rough water. So I was like, okay, this is a new challenge to tackle. So I went and actually it was my second day. I literally arrived driving from Brisbane to Sydney. And a friend of mine in the master swimming community messaged me and asked if I wanted to do an open water. So I was like, all right, baptism by fire, let's go. We got there, and the shorter race had just finished, and there'd been 2 suspected spinals because of how rough the water was. So our race had been cancelled. So it wasn't the most ideal start, but I tried again the week after, and fell in love with it as well. I'm not a big open water like solitude swimmer, so I don't go by myself because, again, terrified of sharks irrationally. But I do love doing the open water races and being in the open water with people. It's good fun, good challenge.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I too, I guess, you know, I grew up more on this, like on the bay in salt water. So it was definitely more of my habitat. But it's kind of, there's an uncertainty and unknown that is around you being in the open water. Yeah. And I think you know this story, but fun fact about me, when I was in Sydney, my first time there, we got to go out on a boat in the harbor, and that boat took us to the mouth of the Sydney harbor, and I actually jumped in, and the water was out there. Of course, it is not your typical dark Sydney harbor water. It was very clear. You could see right to the bottom. It was white sand, little beaches. And, but no, I jumped in. The boat that we were on had a mask, and, you know, I was in there by myself, but I was totally okay when I was, you know, looking down. But it was when I was looking out into the abyss is when I literally started hyperventilating. So I can only imagine what it's like. Even though I'd imagine majority of the water around Australia, I mean, it's pretty tropical, right? It's usually pretty good visual all the way through, transparency.
When it's a bit scary and cloudy and rough and you can't really see much in front of you, that's when it feels sharky.
Yeah, no, I mean, for a lover of Shark Week, I have to admit that's typically when they come out, according to the scientists on Shark Week. So I think your senses are up to something, which is it makes me happy. It makes me happy. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about a different time of uncertainty, right? The world crisis that's going on right now. We had a little bit of a conversation. Well, most of our conversation before we actually hit record was about what was going on in the world, how New Zealand is handling the situation versus Australia. Y'all are on the other side of the world than we are. We're kind of next in line after Europe. And it seems as if you guys are kind of behind the US a little bit, or right in tow. So kind of give your version of how you are adjusting, and then maybe turn it into how you're adjusting with it with your athletes. So again, a personal and a professional perspective.
Yep. So because I've been following the countries in front of New Zealand, I feel like it's been on the forefront of my mind, and I've been taking it, I guess, a little more seriously than some others, because I've seen what can happen. I'm a naturally cautious person that way, and I haven't really taken light of the situation from day one. So personally, I think it's really hit though mentally in the last week. I can definitely feel that my anxiety has been higher, and we had a case recently where an athlete had been overseas. I work part of, there's 2 gyms in our town, and in one of the gyms, an athlete had been overseas. They were showing symptoms and went into the gym. So anyone part of that facility got completely shut down. We all got told we couldn't come into our other gym. So we essentially kind of got put on lockdown for 2 days. And that was, it seemed okay at the start, but then it got a little bit more scary. You kind of feel like you have the plague, and you're worried that you're worried about everyone else around you. So that was, a really eye-opening moment for me. Thankfully, the athlete tested negative, so we're all good at this stage. But it's definitely hitting me harder, and being away from my family and my friends, I feel like a little bit more isolated. And I think making sure that as a human race, we keep reaching out to everyone and we keep communicating. I'm finding phone calls and chatting with people is really, really helping. Mm-hmm. In terms of professionally, at this stage, we're still assuming the Olympics is on, so we're training as usual. If the Olympics does happen to be on, we're in a quite lucky position, considering we've been able to keep training. However, it's a really big time of uncertainty for the athletes as well. They don't want to think that their life is bigger than others, but they've been training 4 years for something, and they're just in limbo waiting to hear if it's going to stay on. So trying to keep the athletes calm and focused is a really, really important thing at this stage. We can't control what's going to happen in the next few months. So you've just got to assume at this stage that it's still on, and try and keep them at training and enjoying it rather than stressing and thinking about what could happen. But it's a big, scary time for a lot of people.
Yeah. You kind of talked about, family dynamics, staff dynamics, a little bit of like the athlete dynamic, when you're talking about the mental side of it and the anxiety. And I think these are all very natural occurring feelings and emotions and stuff like that. Do you guys currently have sports psychologists on staff, and have they stepped in at all to maybe help create plans? Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, we're really lucky. We have full-time sports psych, and we also have, we call them athlete life, and it's basically career and life counseling as well. So we kind of hit it on 2 facets. Our psych is there for the athletes literally at all times. It doesn't have to be around stress and whatnot, but they can see him at any time. And he literally floats around when he doesn't have appointments and talks to the athletes and sees how they're going. They're really lucky to have that person to go with. At this stage, as far as I understand, and I have been off work for a few days with the potential change, and things are changing so quickly that there could be new plans coming forward as I speak. But at this stage, there's no specific wellness plans, but I think it's just general, just trying to make sure that the athletes know that there's people to talk to whenever they need.
Nice. I think that's so important. And at least in the States, a lot of universities and teams, they're on spring break right now. So, it is a time to, relax, kind of like reset yourself. And I've been talking to a lot of coaches about doing just that, because we are human and we do need that, but then you layer in, the fact that the Olympics are supposed to happen. And like you said, these athletes have trained for 4 years straight. It's hard to kind of be calm and reset when this is the time that you've been, waiting for in your life. And it is a bunch of uncertainty, but I think it's one of those moments where you have to embrace that and, kind of go forward and keep on,
Absolutely.
one step at a time, 10 toes down, be present where you're at and just embrace that uncertainty. And, we're a little bit at an advantage as athletes and coaches that we coach that every single day. We coach that, be comfortable when you're uncomfortable. And, I think Coach Hootie from the States had made a mention about that as well. It's just like, this is what we do. Like, this is what we talk about every single day. And now it's much bigger than just what we talk about with the team, but it's so important to remember the basics and remember what the basic lessons are that we talk about on a day-to-day.
Sure.
Okay, so I have just a handful. I call them my Corona Fire questions, and you have to do your best in having one-word answers. They're going to try to be rapid fire. Sometimes they spin into an elaborate conversation, but considering you've only been off work for 3 days, these might be a little bit more different, maybe not that much of a change, but we're just going to go for it, okay? All right. The first one is, what is your if new, COVID go-to breakfast?
Toast, but not new. Same breakfast.
Personal question. Do you put Vegemite on it?
I love Vegemite, but I am peanut butter at this stage.
Okay, cool. All right. Do you have a new COVID activity?
Walking. Lots and lots of walking. Calms the stress, and being outdoor is to avoid the cabin fever.
Yeah, amen to that. Do you have a new COVID habit?
I don't think so yet, but I'm trying to be productive and do the online courses that I've been neglecting.
Nice. Yeah. Upskilling. It's a great time for
exactly.
Okay. Something that you took advantage of before the world crisis hit.
Human contact.
100%. I agree with you. And last but not least, do you have a current COVID go-to TV show or movie that is a must-see?
Oh, no, I'm just rewatching Nashville. It's a great show, so rewatching.
Nice, wonderful. That's great. Well, do you have at this point, do you have anything else that you want to touch on or, say?
I just, reaching out to the world and everyone, just be kind and think about others. Remember that we're all in this together, and if we don't focus on ourselves, we'll get through this. Nice. No, very, very sound advice. Well, it was definitely a pleasure seeing you and I know. And talking to you. And I hope all y'all that are tuned in got some good bits out of that. So thank you so much for coming on. No, thank you for having me. So good to see you.